Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fetal Position, episode number 10. My name is Elijah, and I have been gone for far too long. Today, we're going to be talking about the use of fetal tissues and cells for research, and we're going to be touching a little bit on vaccines. Alright, so the last time I uploaded something was just about a month ago, and since then, as you guys can probably imagine, my son, Cole, was born. I think I uploaded the last podcast just a couple days before he decided to make his way onto the scene. So I won't be doing any more of the fetal development stuff, and because this is a podcast on fetal development in particular, or the fetal position and unborn stuff, I'm not going to be talking about his development post-birth. If you are interested in that, you can feel free to contact me on Twitter or an email or any of that stuff. I will gladly fill you in on any of those details if you want some of that. I appreciate everyone's patience in waiting for me to get this stuff back up and going again. I know I don't have a huge pile of people eagerly waiting the next episode, but I do really appreciate the audience that I do have currently. They have maintained a decent amount of interaction on our private Facebook group we have at thefetalposition.com/Facebook. We also I've been interacting with a handful of people on Twitter, which is at @fetal_position, and the conversation has continued, but unfortunately, as many of you can probably imagine, having a newborn kind of messes things up a little bit. I want to get into just a little bit about a couple of current events that have happened since, well, the last month has been kind of crazy. This is, for those of you guys listening in the future, this is July of 2016, and my son was born on June 14th, 2016, and it is currently, what's the date today? July 17th. So it has been quite a wild ride because since then, there's been a whole bunch of stuff going on with like police shootings, then a whole bunch of Black Lives Matter stuff, and a ton of like terrorist shootings. There's that truck incident in France. There was the release of Pokemon Go, which, as a side note, I'd like to thank Nintendo for releasing Pokemon Go when they did, because if they didn't release Pokemon Go when they did, the entire news would probably have just been filled with death. And that, I don't know, there must be some providential stuff, something behind Pokemon Go being released, because if you look at, your news feed over the last month or so, it's pretty much just been, people died here, some cops died here, some black people died here in a protest, the people have been hitting people with their cars, terrorists exploding things. Oh, and I caught a Bulbasaur in my backyard. It was I'm sure there's some kind of cosmic reason as to why Pokemon Go was released at the same time as all these. That it kind of gets into what I just wanted to talk very, very briefly about. Black Lives Matter. And I know this is what the subject of this podcast is, abortion primarily. And the other day, I had been reading a lot on Black Lives Matter, and I felt strongly for like the I don't know how I want to put this, but the emotional aspect behind what Black Lives Matter stands for, because a lot of people are looking at so I'm going to step back for a second. I think it's vitally important for us to recognize the difference between Black Lives Matter as a group, the group that calls themselves Black Lives Matter, and then the group of people that just genuinely believe that Black lives do matter. Because if we don't make that distinction, then I think it's going to work. What seems to be happening is that someone will object to the actions of the group known as Black Lives Matter, and then what people who are in favor of it will think is that someone objecting to that particular action means they don't think Black Lives Matter. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have people that on one side, and on the Black Lives Matter side, who they will say Black Lives Matter, and then people on the other side, which honestly there shouldn't be sides in this, but people on the quote unquote other side will think that this means that no lives except Black Lives Matter. Now, I posted something on Facebook that was along the lines of course, Black Lives Matter. Black lives definitely matter, and is because all lives matter. All lives are important. All of us have inherent moral worth. All of us are made in the image of God. That is why Black Lives Matter. But I didn't get as much crap as I thought I was going to get, probably because by this time everybody who doesn't like to hear what I have to say on this topic probably has already blocked me or unfriended me or whatever. But more to the point of the actual actions of a group being reflecting on the whole group, as a movement. So the pro-life movement, we have been so if you look back in the past, we have had situations where there have been people who have been killing or bombing or doing whatever in the name of being pro-life, right? You have people who've been killing abortion providers. You've seen people who have been assaulting women outside of abortion clinics, and that there was a video that I watched, and it was a Black Lives Matter guy, and he was saying that he's been vitally or intimately involved with the Black Lives Matter group itself. But then now, since all this stuff has happened, these people have been shooting cops and people have been rioting in the streets and looting their own neighborhoods for no reason. That's not how you... never mind. He was saying that no matter what progress has been made, we have been set back 50 years. Now, I can't help but think the same thing goes for abortion and pro-life people. When some idiot goes ahead and kills some abortion provider, and then assaults some women who are trying to get abortions. That is not how we want to do this. We know that this is not how it works. We know this sets up people in a vulnerable position and makes it so that people are thinking with their emotions. We don't want that. We don't want that in the pro-life position. We don't want that in Black Lives Matter. We just want everyone to be treated as equals. And this crap, it needs to stop. I don't know how to have it stop, but it does. I wish I had a solution. But what we need to do as pro-lifers is be consistently pro-life all the time. We can't just pick and choose who we want to be pro-life for. Now, I get it. I've actually been kind of poking at people who have said that if you're pro-life, then you are supposed to be anti-death penalty and anti all this other stuff. Being pro-life in and of itself as a political position for abortion does not mean anything other than being against abortion, elective abortion. However, if we're going to create a culture that respects everyone at all levels of development, no matter what race you are, no matter how old you are, if you are respecting you as human beings, we have to recognize what we've been talking about is that all lives have inherent moral worth. And this includes the unborn, and this includes cops and black people and everybody. And I'm almost entirely convinced that this entire debacle is in existence because people don't realize that other people's lives are just as valuable as their life and the lives of their loved ones. And I really hope if you are promoting the all lives matter position on things, that you really mean it, that you're not just saying it so that you can be a counter voice to Black Lives Matter. I hope you mean it in a way that is saying, yes, all lives matter, and that includes Black lives. And so for right now, because there is an injustice involving Black people, we are going to say Black Lives Matter. Not to promote the nonsense that these people who are rioting in the streets and destroying their own neighborhoods, not that. We're not promoting that. We're promoting equality for everyone because you are a human being. That was I didn't really plan on writing that down. I didn't plan on saying that, all of it. I wanted to say something. The other day, I was standing, and I had just finished reading, and I was standing in front of the garbage can, and I had just thrown something out, and I'm like, I need to record something right now. But it was like right as in the middle of the reports on the riots and stuff, and I was like, I can totally understand where each side of this is coming from, and I need to say something, but I don't want to be the guy who just shoots from the hip and emotionally responds to something without thinking about it. And I think that's how we should be. If we want to promote a reasoned dialogue on a wide variety of topics, we need to make sure we're doing it in every situation. Okay. On a complete side note, guess what? I found some cool new music. So I'm going to transition from what I just said into the topic today with this cool new music. Isn't it just so great? It's like, it's so, okay, if you're interested, complete side note, this is called Thor's Hammer by Ethan Mikesell, and if you go to YouTube, they have this free music that you can just download, and if you give credit to some of it, you can just take it and use it for your videos and for your podcasts and stuff. Listen to this. I know, you're probably like, well, I wasn't here to listen to metal. You know what? It's my podcast. I do what I want. Yeah, so like I said, that's cool. I want to integrate some different music into stuff. My brother, Jacob, he's the one who made the original music that I have been using. That kind of it's like almost, EDM kind of dubstep-y type of stuff, and I really like that. I'm going to continue to use that, but in transitions and maybe outros and stuff, I'm going to use some different stuff. So, yeah, that, again, another thing not a part of this original idea. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to jump right into the topics that we want to talk about. And those topics being the use of fetal or embryonic, actually, tissue and cells in scientific research, and that actually inspired me to kind of want to talk a little bit about vaccines. Now, remember, I've mentioned this before, episode 5, 10, 15, 20. Every 5 episodes I want to do the afterbirth segment. This is no different. I think this is a little bit more, the last one I did was genetic engineering, so it's actually probably about as close to abortion as genetic engineering is, the use of fetal tissue and fetal cells in research and in vaccines. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but I've heard a handful of people make arguments against against the use of vaccines because they say that fetal tissue is used in the vaccine development or during administration. And it's tough for me to initially just give that the benefit of the doubt, but I ran into I had a conversation with a guy at work. Now, as you guys know, I work in a cell culture lab. I'm a quality control guy, so I'm not like a scientist, but that's like the next step up for me. I get a little more responsibility. I will be a scientist, but I do don a lab coat and I put fancy gloves on and I play with living cells all day. And I had a conversation with one of the engineers, and he was talking about he just had questions about what it is that I do and where we get the cells and what the cells do and why people need the cells. And I mean, you know how when you get into a particular field of study, you get really acclimated to the knowledge base that you have, and everybody around you has that knowledge base. Well, I didn't know that people didn't realize how kind of this stuff was made. Now, looking back on it, I realize, well, duh. I mean, not everybody has studied, cell cultures and how we get vaccines and how we get certain treatments for certain diseases and stuff. But it didn't seem obvious to me. But when he asked the question, he genuinely thought that when I said that I had SP2 cells, that those SP2 cells were going to be used in medicine and they were going to be injected into his body. Now, he asked where the cells come from, and I said, well, I don't know the name of the company, ATCC or something like that. And he's like, no, I don't mean where they came from in that sense. I mean, where do they come from in the, where did they actually come from? Are they human cells? And I was like, oh, no, SB2 are it's a specific type of cell called a hybridoma, and I don't want to mess up the description, so I'm going to read it off of medicinenet.com. It says, hybridomas are produced by injecting a specific antigen into a mouse, collecting an antibody-producing cell from the mouse's spleen, and fusing it with a tumor cell called a melanoma cell. The hybridoma cells multiply indefinitely in the laboratory and can be used to produce a specific antibody indefinitely. So what I didn't have that definition, but I kind of did my best to explain it to him at the time, and he goes, so when I get whatever a disease, and I need to get a shot for that disease, why does my body not reject the mouse cells? And I was like, oh no, your body they don't put the mouse cells in your body. And he goes, what do you mean? What do you mean they don't put the mouse cells in my body? I was like, no. Okay, so as a side note, this is where I started thinking this is actually a good time for me to write down that I should do this as a podcast. So I did, and this is the result of that. But so when people that the definition I just read, where the second part, it says the hybridoma cells multiply indefinitely in the laboratory. So what we can do is we can use the cell lines to we never have to get new ones. Well, there's a qualification with that, they'll genetically mutate enough so that they stop being functional. But so you have to just get a new freeze, order some more or whatever. But at the second part of that, it says, and can be used to produce a specific antibody indefinitely. Now, an antibody is a large Y-shaped protein. They're found in the blood and in other body fluids of vertebrates. Antibodies are the key element in the adaptive immune system. I know I keep doing side notes, but if you guys don't know what something is and you want a very way to explain it, go to simple.wikipedia.org and type it in. That's the one I just read from Simple Wikipedia. But if you go to regular Wikipedia, on Simple Wikipedia is antibodies are large Y-shaped proteins. They are found in the blood system of other or bodily fluids of vertebrates. Antibodies are the key element in the adaptive immune system. Now, if I go to the regular Wikipedia and search for antibody, it says an antibody is a large Y-shaped protein produced mainly by plasma cells that is used in the immune system to identify and neutralize pathogens such as bacteria and viruses. The antibody recognizes a unique molecule of the harmful agent called an antigen via the variable region. Now, both of them are true, but one of them is just much easier to get the picture of what's going on. So anyway, when I'm talking to the engineer at work, he thought that the mouse cells actually got injected into his body. Now, granted, I don't know if the SB2 cells are actually used for medicine development, but I wanted to make sure that he understood that when people have a cell culture, what they do is they put in something, and it's a particular type of cell will produce something if given. So, input X, output Y, and then they use that output Y in the medicine. So in this case, it's able to produce an antibody. Now, the antibodies is what goes on to be used in vaccines. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the ethical dimensions behind using cells or tissues that have been derived from an aborted fetus or an aborted embryo. Now, interestingly enough, this actually goes into exactly what I do at work. So there's a cell line that we're working right now that I work, and I do a couple of different tests. I'm not going to get into the details of the tests, but a couple of the different tests that I do use what's called WI38. WI38 cells are human lung cells that were taken from an aborted fetus in in July of 1962. So every single day I go in, and not every single day, I don't pay attention to these cells every single day, but every single day I go in and I am in one way or another interacting with WI38 cells. As a interesting point of note, there's another cell that can be used in the exact same testing that I use for the WI38 cells. Those are called MRC5. Those were taken from abortion. It was performed in 1966. So if we do end up getting rid of the WI38 cells, which who knows at this point, because I'm still relatively new and I'm not allowed to make those decisions just yet, so I'm just kind of going along with the flow. But if we do move over from WI38 to MRC5, that means I'm going from one cell line that was taken from an abortion into another cell line that was taken from an abortion. Now, this, actually, it was before this, I started asking my supervisor or one of the scientists in the lab about a couple of the other cell lines that we have. And we have some embryonic stem cell lines. And I looked it up, and those, I'll talk about embryonic stem cells at some point in the future. And I'll get into more of either what we have or maybe at that point I'll actually have used them. I don't use them yet. But that inspired me to think about and read about what the ethical implications are of using cells that came from an aborted fetus, right? Because at some point, there's got to be a line that we draw, right? It seems like that's my initial visceral reaction, is to think, oh, I'm not going to, are you kidding me? This is from an abortion? I can't use this. But then what do I do? I'm at work. This is my job. Do I say, no, I can't do this, I have an ethical or religious or whatever excuse to not do it, and then I just hand off my WI assays over to someone else in the lab? Or what do I do? But the first thing I had to do was I had to think about, what exactly does this mean? Now, what I typically would like to do is I want to use, instead of talking about an abortion, cells derived or tissues derived from an abortion, I like to think of it in terms of another human being. So let's imagine that we have let's make it super personal. Let's say my newborn son, he dies, right? I don't know how, whatever happens, let's just say he dies, and then he gets rushed to the hospital and he's on life support and he ends up passing away. But he's still on life support, right? It sucks that he died, right? But then somebody comes in and says, hey, your son was O negative, which is an extremely rare blood type. Let's make it even more rare. He was Bombay blood type. If you don't know what that is, check that out. It's pretty interesting. He's a Bombay blood type. I don't know how it got there, because it didn't get it from you or his mother. But either way, actually, okay, so my wife is actually O negative, so he may have gotten O negative from her. So he's a rare blood type, and this kid who was just born last week, he needs a heart transplant. And he's O negative. And what are the odds that your son died of something else? I don't know. It wasn't a heart injury. Now, what do I do? Do I think, well, no, he can't use this because he died in it's from a newborn who died? No, that doesn't seem like a reasonable response to this. The situation that caused the organ to become available sucked, but the organ is available, right? So why shouldn't we use it for the best possible thing that it can be used for? Now, I know the first thing that we're thinking is, well, what happens when you need more cells? Well, if you recall from about a minute or two ago, I just said that the WI38 cells and the MRC5 cells were taken from abortions in the 60s. The 60s. So this means that the cell line that I currently use was made in 1962, and the cell line that was made in 1966 I might be using in the future. That's a really long time. And the reason we can do this is because of the way that we preserve the cells. We use liquid nitrogen to basically stop all metabolism, and they don't divide anymore. And so we stop them. We halt their development at a particular point, and so they no longer divide. They stay in suspension in a way that maintains what they were in the 60s or the 70s or however long it took them to actually put the freeze down. Because with the WI cells, we can only do like 23 or 24 passages, or when I'm not going to get into that. So I will get into this a little bit. It's something called a Hayflick's limit. WI38 cells were actually made back when a guy named Hayflick came up with this idea that there was a limit to the number of passages, or the number of times that you could it was not passages, sorry. It's the number of times that a cell can divide while maintaining its vital, its identity, right? So a cell can divide and divide and divide and divide, but eventually, because of the buildup of genetic mutations, it changes into a different type of cell. Not a different type of cell altogether, but a different type of cell that is no longer functional as the original cell type. So what you have to do in order to be able to get the cells to maintain what they are over a very long period of time is put them as a freeze before they hit the Hayflick's limit. Hayflick's limit says it's okay for this particular cell. It's I don't know how many divisions. It's a certain number of divisions, and after that you might as well toss them out. I just found that as a really interesting fun fact, that I was using the same exact cell line that I think his name is Leonard Hayflick. Again, I'm gonna look it up. Yep, his name is Leonard Hayflick, and he discovery known as Hayflick's limit overturned the dogma that since Alexis Carrel's work on the century. So, yeah, he came up with the idea that cultured normal human and animal cells have a limited capacity for replication. So when I first heard that I was going to be using WI38 cells, it didn't really mean much to me, and then I Googled it, and I was like, sweet, something that actually is really important in cell biology is the same type of cells. But yeah, I think I tweeted 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I said I was going to be recording the episode on this episode, and I said I was probably going to be nerding out a little bit when it comes to cell biology, which I never thought I would have said 10 years ago. Holy cow. But I just did. So I hope that wasn't too terrible for you. All right. What is it? What we'll talk about next here? Okay, yeah. So another example of something that is a terrible situation that resulted in something good in the bioethics community is what's called the Tuskegee experiments. If you've never heard of this, the summary of it. Sorry, it's late at night. The summary of it is basically what they did. A handful of scientists back in the early 30s. I'm looking it up real quick. Yeah, so between 1932 and 1972, the Tuskegee syphilis study was an infamous clinical study by the U.S. Public Health Service studying the natural progression of untreated syphilis in rural African American men in Alabama under the guise of receiving free health care from the United States government. Side note, and you wonder why I am skeptical of free health care from the United States government. Anyway, in this, what they did was they took a bunch of black guys from 1932, 1972, who had syphilis, and they brought them to a place, and they said that they were, trying to heal the syphilis, but what they weren't. They were just watching the progression of syphilis and documenting it. Now, that's horrible. Objectively evil. Terrible. But what they did was they got a lot of information from that situation, they got a ton of information on the progression of syphilis. And that information has given us a lot of ammo in order to be able to fight syphilis as a disease. Now, did the information come about in a sneaky, terrible, evil way? Yes, of course. But is anybody arguing that we can't use that information because it came about terribly? No, at least I don't know anybody who's doing that. So I think in the same way, if there are cells that have been derived from an aborted fetus, as long as there's no new abortions happening in order to get cells, which it's actually against federal law, I believe. I'll have to look more into that. Maybe I'll do an update about that, the law behind not embryonic stem cells, but the law behind harvesting cells and tissues from aborted fetuses for, like, having abortions for that purpose. As long as there are no abortions continuing to happen currently in order to get cells, I don't see why those cells should be just allowed to kind of waste away. They perform a function. They help us. We can use them in research. We can use them in vaccines. We can use them in a lot of different things. And so unless, granted, there might be something I'm leaving out, but I think I've thought through this pretty well. If you think of something else, let me know on the private Facebook group or on Twitter or wherever. Find me on the street, tackle me down, be like, bro, you forgot about this. What about this? I will be like, hey, excuse me, sir, who are you? And why are you tackling me while I'm trying to catch this weedle? All right. So, yeah. So, again, like I said, if you have any thoughts on that, do let me know, because I would love to kind of wrestle around with this topic a little bit more than I have if I did not do it justice. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. So, the next thing we want to do is dive a little bit into vaccines, which is actually a very interesting story. So I'm going to go ahead and start it kind of with where it began, which is interesting. Brutal. Okay, so vaccines began with, they've been here for a long time. Well, not vaccines, but the knowledge of and the understanding of how vaccines will come to work has been here for a long time. Back in ancient Egypt, there was a time when people understood that if you came in contact with a disease once and you did not die, that you would probably not get it again, unless it was they didn't really understand germ theory and all that stuff, but unless it was, you wouldn't get the exact same thing. That was way back. I think it had something to do with King Tut, even. So it goes pretty far back. Fast forward to the mid to late 1700s, and allow me to introduce to you my good buddy Edward Jenner. He was an English physician and scientist who was the pioneer of the smallpox vaccine, which was the world's first actual vaccine. He's been called the father of immunology, and it is said that his work has saved more people than anyone else. So he's a pretty important guy in this area. There's some contention as to whether or not he deserves the title of the father of immunology, because there were some other people doing similar work at the same time. But you know how history works. So with Edward Jenner, back in his time, there was a situation where people were getting smallpox all the time. And so what they ended up doing was sort of like how when I was a kid, our parents used to bring, little Johnny's got chickenpox, so, well, now it's time for everybody to get chickenpox, so let's have a chickenpox party. And then they brought everybody over, all the little kids, between young age, before 10. They all went over to some kid's party, and then everybody wasn't allowed to play with anybody else for the remainder of the next 2 weeks or whatever, because they were all recovering from chickenpox. But the cool thing about that was that all of a sudden, after you had the chickenpox, ta-da, you were essentially immune to chickenpox, because what had happened is your immune system now understood what chickenpox was. it fought against it because it was able to recognize. So molecules interact in a very specific way. The immune system will attach to the active portion of the disease, and then once it gets used to that active portion of the disease, it more easily recognizes it. Think of it like a lock and a key. The key comes in, which is the disease, and starts doing bad stuff, right? And then the immune system comes in and looks at the key and is like, let me analyze that. And then does some kind of reverse engineering and then makes it so that it has something that the key fits into perfectly. And then as soon as the key fits into it perfectly, it disables the key. That's what our immune system does. That's how vaccines work. That's how the chickenpox thing works. That's how this thing that I'm going to talk to you about, the history of vaccines with Edward Jenner, worked as well. So everyone was dying back then from smallpox because smallpox sucked. And during that time, what had happened was because people knew that once you got smallpox once, you didn't get it again, they would, it's kind of gross, but they would just take some pus or something from a smallpox wound, and they would administer it to themselves. I've read that they would powder it and they would snort it, or they would just drink it, mix it in with a drink or something. Either way, they had to introduce the disease to their body and then accept the fact that they were getting full-blown smallpox within the next day or so. But it was during a time they could control it, so they took some vacation time or whatever from the farm, and they decided that was the week that or the 2 weeks or 3 weeks that they wanted to be in bed rest, so that the other members of their family could take care of them. They had enough food and water. It wasn't in the middle of the winter time. Blah blah blah. So it was a strategic decision to give themselves the disease. But if you've spent any time in the the culture of farmland, there's some kind of, I don't want to say it's like a myth, but it's sort of like an old wives' tale that says that milkmaids are always very beautiful. Poems and things like that talk about the beauty of the milkmaid, and that was because they never got smallpox. Smallpox itself left terrible wounds and scars and disfiguration and all this other stuff all over people's faces and hands and legs and chests and backs, so it was terrible. But what happened with the milkmaids is the milkmaids got what's called cowpox from milking the cows. The cows gave them the cowpox, and they ended up getting it just on their hands and upper arms, and maybe a little bit towards their shoulder, but it really didn't spread much after that. It turns out the smallpox and the cowpox are essentially the same disease. So what they were doing then is they were looking at smallpox and saying, well, this disease really sucks. And then they were looking at cowpox and they're like, well, this disease sucks less. And so just like a presidential election, they chose a lesser of two evils, and people would inoculate themselves with the cowpox. And then they would get a little briefcase of cowpox, and then they wouldn't get smallpox. So here's where it gets iffy. So nobody had tried that really before Edward Jenner. What he did, I forget exactly who it was. I think it was like his. It was somebody like his right-hand man's son, or no, it was his gardener's son. Okay, it was his gardener's son. I should have written this down, but I'm just kind of going from my memory. It was his gardener's son. So he took his gardener's son and gave him, he had been in contact with cowpox in one way or another. I can't remember exactly how it was. Either Edward Jenner gave him cowpox or he had cowpox in the past. And what he did is he just took this kid who was probably, I think he was an early teen or preteen, and he took him, and then he took a bit of smallpox and he gave it to the kid and was like, well, good luck, kid. His hypothesis was that the smallpox would not take because his immune system had already been acclimated to cowpox. He got a little bit sick, but he turns out he didn't get full-blown smallpox. So he was confirmed that this version of pox, which was cowpox, acted as a lesser version of the disease. So this is what we do now with vaccines is we will take the disease that exists and we will culture it and we will basically beat it to a pulp or kill it completely, and then we'll take that killed or dying or almost dead tiny bit of disease and we put it into the body, so that what happens is the body recognizes the disease the first time around and launches an immune response. So that's why occasionally some kids will get like a small fever or a little bit of swelling, because the body's response to a new foreign invader is to launch an attack. That attack looks like a fever, or it is exemplified in a bit of swelling. Sort of like when you get allergies in the summer. That is, the allergies themselves are just confusing your immune system, and your immune system is responding by swelling up your nasal passages and all this other stuff. So all that all that stuff that happens in the summertime when you have allergies, blame your immune system, because it's just confusing pollen for a foreign invader. Yeah, thanks a lot, immune system. But anyway, so jumping back to Edward Jenner, so it confirmed for him his hypothesis that the cowpox was actually a lesser version of smallpox, and was able to use that in a way that was not inoculation, because inoculation was giving yourself the full disease. The actual full smallpox was called inoculation. Interestingly enough, because this is called cowpox, the Latin word for cow is vaca, V-A-C-A. And we all know where VACA, vaca, begins, is the beginning of vaccines. So the reason we call them vaccines is because Edward Jenner decided to use cowpox in order to help out a small boy. Well, help out everybody, but originally, use a small boy as a test subject. And then fast forward a whole bunch of time, and we are here now where we have that good old vaccine controversy. Now, I'm not going to get too far into that. There's a lot of information on it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So vaccines nowadays are understood to be the most cost-effective ways to prevent disease. They have helped in polio's eradication, at least in first world countries. They have helped us become almost completely free of things like measles, mumps, rubella, and there are actually currently vaccines that are being developed for various forms of cancer, which is super cool. There are, in my research, I've been looking a little bit into different ways to administer vaccines, and one obviously is what we all know of as the dreaded needle. I actually don't have a big problem with the needle, but I know a lot of people do. So there's other ways to do it. There's a nasal spray, and there are things in other mucous membranes other than your nose. Interestingly enough, this is because you can put them there because that's where the infections happen. And so if you give the cells direct access to the vaccines, it helps out a lot, because then they don't get through the mucous membrane. Now, the mucous membranes you can put them in, uncomfortable places, like the butthole in the vagina. So a lot of people aren't super keen on that. But if you really don't like the nasal spray for whatever reason, or if it's a particular type of vaccine that needs to be administered in the nether regions, maybe that's the way you want to go about it. The access point. Interestingly enough, there is a development right now in micro needle patches. So there are patches that are about the size of what looks like a nicotine patch, and you put it on your skin. It has these micro needles with a tiny little well on the inside of them, and they administer the vaccine in a way that is not just stabbing into your, deep into your skin, but just a little teeny bit, and then it kind of dissipates over the next, I think it's an hour. You can take it off within, I think they say you can take it off within the hour. But yeah, so the most recent thing that I started looking into was there's actually ways to be able to administer vaccines to pregnant women, for the developing children, which is super cool, because a lot of times what happens is the vaccines, when administered to newborn babies or very young children, is it tends to compromise their immune system temporarily, because the immune system is like, hey, holy crap, look at that over there. We got to focus our attention on that. And then here comes the common cold and beats up your kid because the immune system's been a little bit distracted. But with this, you can actually inoculate or vaccinate, not inoculate, vaccinate pregnant women so their babies can use the mom's immune system, which is super cool. I like that a lot. I don't know all the diseases that they have been able to vaccinate in that sense, but, if you are in that, it might be good something to ask your doctor about if you're interested in that kind of a thing. But so getting into the controversy part of it is, I think the reason it is a controversy is because people haven't seen these diseases in so long that they become complacent. Now, my grandparents' generation was the generation that has seen measles and mumps and things like that. People actually used to die of these things. But then, like my parents' generation, the baby boomers, they don't even really know, like, it wasn't a part of their growing up because the vaccines kind of began at this point. There were some diseases like chickenpox and things like that for them. But then, you get one step even further, and then you have me, which is, I am a millennial. Please don't fault me for the actions of my counterparts, but I am a millennial, and so I am 2 generations removed from anything that would be considered, deadly. So I think that's one of the reasons that people look at the diseases and think, well, I don't need to. Whoever gets measles anyway. I was having a conversation with someone, and this person will remain nameless because if you are listening to this podcast and know me, you might know this person. But this person was saying that why would we get vaccines? Because the measles, mumps, and rubella shot, because no one gets measles, mumps, or rubella anyway. Now, at this time when this person said this, I was young enough to be influenced, but not that young to know that people don't get the vaccine. People don't get measles, mumps, and rubella anymore because the vaccines work. And I think this is another problem with vaccines in the social sphere, why people have problems with them, is because it comes with a problem of the vaccine's own success. Now, so let's imagine we had a disease that was wiping out a whole bunch of the greatest generation, my grandparents' generation, people who are like 80, 90 right now. Is wiping out them, and then there's a development of a vaccine that prevents against that. It vaccinates against that. And then the baby boomers come on the scene, and they're like, well, I heard stories about this, but I don't know much about it. But it's part of the vaccination schedule anyway, so I might as well get it. And then they have kids, and then those kids are me and stuff like that. And so from a ignorant millennial's perspective, it looks at it and be like, wow, that disease, no one's ever even seen that disease. Like the only people that have ever seen that disease are old fogies, and their memory's probably all screwed up. So when I start having kids, my kids aren't going to have any of those diseases, but I'm not going to vaccinate them because who even gets those diseases anyway? Yeah, I know. Not a good way to think. But there are people who do that. And obviously, yeah, I'm not coming at this from a neutral perspective. I am pro-vaccines, but as a libertarian, I'm going to get into that a little bit. Just a couple sentences, don't worry. I'm not going to preach liberty at you, even though you shouldn't be a libertarian. Again, like I said, it's the problems of the vaccine's own success. So the vaccine works, and then a couple generations later, they're like, well, no one's ever seen this disease, so they stop taking the vaccine, and it comes back. Now, there are some things that have been completely eradicated in the way that the disease itself has been completely gone. Like, there is no trace of the disease at all anywhere, so people can't even get it. However, with the movement between continents and countries and all this other stuff, if you do not stay up to date on your vaccines, then someone could come over from a third world country that does not have these vaccines, and someone may be carrying something like pertussis or whooping cough, and then you get it, but it's not a big deal because you're an adult, and then you come in contact with, say, your nephew, who is a newborn baby. You hold a newborn baby, and then you are carrying whooping cough or the pertussis disease, and then your nephew gets it and then dies. Now, how bad do you feel? You probably wouldn't even know that that's what happened. After all, whooping cough is just, you got a little bit of a tickle in your throat, you cough a little bit, but it's not a big deal because you can handle it. And this gets into herd immunity. Now, apparently this is controversial, even though I don't see how. Herd immunity is the idea that you can be not, I don't want to say you're vaccinated against it, but you are protected against it because of the people surrounding you are all vaccinated against a particular thing. So there was a kid that I heard about, I forget his name, Russ, something like that. And he became like a poster child for the pro-vaccine movement a little while ago, and he had leukemia. Now, after he got leukemia, it was a big deal, and then it went into recession. But the problem was the treatment for the leukemia made it so that his immune system was compromised for a significant period of time. He couldn't get the vaccine schedules because the vaccines would the immune system wouldn't launch an appropriate attack against the against the vaccine, so he would either get the full-blown disease or the vaccine would be totally functionless. It wouldn't actually do anything in the long term. So there was a big controversy about whether or not this herd immunity thing should be something that we should strive for as a people, especially in like places like public schools. So what they did was, I forget exactly, it may have been in Iowa or Indiana. I forget exactly where this was, but there was a big court case that basically the two sides were, one side was saying that, well, we ought to be able to decide for ourselves and for our children whether or not we want to vaccinate them. But then on the other side, it was, well, no, you shouldn't be able to do that because of herd immunity. If there are some kids, either the too young, or the too old, or the sick who can't get these vaccines, have to rely on you to not give them the disease. Now, so for me, as a libertarian, I am fully in favor of a parent's right to choose. I am also fully in favor of them making the right decision and choosing to get vaccinated. Now, what does that mean for public schools? Well, as a libertarian, I don't want public schools. I think public schools are a nightmare. I think that people are, no matter how much money we pump into it, the public schools keep getting worse. Now, what does that mean? That means that we should privatize schools. And if we privatize schools, what does that mean? That means that the schools themselves can decide what students they let in and don't let in. What does that mean? That means that schools who have a proper understanding, school administrators who have a proper understanding of vaccines will understand that if someone is not vaccinated against something like pertussis and you have a preschool class, you're not allowed to come here. We have the freedom of association, or we should have the freedom of association to say, I refuse to do business with you unless you prove that you are vaccinated. See, as of right now, there's a big hullabaloo because, everyone is trying to say that their particular viewpoint ought to be enforced in a public place. This is what's called the tragedy of the commons, and I'm not going to get into this because this is not a political philosophy podcast. However, if the way that it's set up right now is it's a lose-lose situation. Everyone wants their way for their tax dollars to be promoted or to do a particular thing, right? But if we were allowed to vote with our dollars instead of giving it to the government and then having them decide, we could make it so that the schools could decide to accept or not accept kids based on their immunity status. Now, what that would probably do is it may result in one school that has a whole bunch of unvaccinated kids. Now, that would suck a lot because they'd probably all get very, very sick. But so like I said, this is not a political philosophy podcast, but if we hold, as Jason Stapleton says, Jason Stapleton, you should check out his podcast, and as Tom Woods also says, he doesn't say this, but he promotes this perspective. But if we hold liberty as a primary political value, then we ought to maintain that people have the right to choose to vaccinate their kids, to choose to make poor decisions about the schools to send them to, and eventually, it probably only take a little bit of time for one bout with whooping cough for their 8-year-old, and then they would say, "Wow, okay, I noticed that all 85 other schools around here are doing really well, and they're all vaccinated. This one school, there's 18 kids here with whooping cough and 3 kids with pneumonia, and this, that, and the other thing. I probably should vaccinate because this seems like a good idea." But right now, we are so obsessed with, this is becoming a rant, sorry. Right now, we have been so obsessed with mandatory vaccines, compulsory vaccinations, instead of educating people about how vaccinations work, that we've relied so much on that now we have a whole bunch of ignorant people arguing about a whole bunch of ignorant things where the rules are set up so that no one can win. I wish I could just hit the reset button, but hey, that's what they did in 1776 or something, right? I just saw a meme the other day that had George Washington. It was like when you give your kids a country, and a couple centuries later they screwed it all up, and George Washington has this like very judgmental looking face on. Yeah. So, all right, I'm just gonna run through my nose real here. All right. So, and real quick, what I'm gonna do is there are a couple of reasons that people object to vaccines. Now, I read an article a little while ago that was talking about how the Catholic Church has actually put out a statement saying that if you have the option, get vaccinated. Now, I don't know how much of an authoritative statement that was, but it did seem to be a very well-received document that influenced a lot of Catholics in that direction. But that gets into the motivation behind it, as in the religious objections. The most common one I've heard is playing God. They think that if we impose our will upon our life by making it so that we can have vaccines, then we are overstepping our bounds as human beings. Now, I'm a Christian, and I think that this playing God objection is absurd, because what God, on Christian theology, God is a metaphysically necessary personal being. He's the creator of the universe, and he created life out of nothing. Now, I don't know if you can do any of that, but I can't. And what he has also done is he's also given us a whole bunch of really awesomely functioning brains with a whole bunch of really awesomely functioning brain friends. And we came up with stuff like the scientific method and consistent philosophy and all this other stuff that it's not like it's surprising God. Oh my goodness, I was hoping that all these people were going to be getting chickenpox this year, but they didn't because they got vaccinated. Darn it, I wish they would stop taking my job. Now I'm playing a little bit, poking a little bit of fun at it, but like when someone objects by saying that we shouldn't do that because we're playing God, it reminds me of someone. And again, I'm not going to mention names because someone, if they know me, will know this person. But I was talking to him about school, and he asked me what I wanted to do. And I told him that I wanted to go into cancer research, because I still do. And he said, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." And I asked why. And he said, because some people get cancer for a reason. Now, I don't know what reason he thought people get cancer. People get cancer because there's an accumulation of genetic mutations in a place in their gene called an oncogene, or a proto-oncogene that transforms it into oncogene, which makes cancer. Now, that's why they get cancer. They don't get cancer because they're being punished. Good luck finding something like that in the Bible or in any, I don't know how about other theologies, but yeah, good luck finding a consistent theology that actually promotes the idea that people get cancer because they've done something wrong. Now, in the same sense, playing God with vaccines, I think, is absurd. God has given us the ability to research the causes of particular problems that we have and gives us, and we can come up with the solutions. What is wrong with that? Again, maybe I'm missing something. But this was a lot of the objection that I got when I was doing that genetic engineering one, that paper for that. So I'm not going to go too much into that. The second fear that I've noticed a lot of people have is the fear of the motives of those promoting vaccines. They think that because someone gets rich off of a vaccine, that he is somehow doing it nefariously. This is really interesting to me because it oftentimes comes from like the more conservative crowd who praise the free market unless it does something they don't want, which is annoying. They're like, yeah, this is great. The free market is awesome unless it promotes, unless someone is getting rich off of vaccines, then obviously he's just some kind of greedy crony capitalist and he's evil and is all this other stuff. But if someone creates a vaccine that is a good value and it's a good functioning vaccine, why can't he make his money off of it? Speaking to conservatives, liberals might think otherwise. They might think, well, he shouldn't be making any money off of that because healthcare should be free. Whatever. I'm not even going to get into that. So I am bouncing all over the place today. This podcast is going to be really long. Shoot. Dang it. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. So the last one is fear of what's in them. Now, this is actually almost legitimate. But what you have to do is you have to look into what's in them. What exactly are you afraid of? And I've heard there are some anti-vax people who are saying something like, well, there's mercury in here and blah, blah, blah. Formaldehyde. Look into why it's there. Why is mercury there? Why is formaldehyde there? Don't go on your anti-vax website. Go onto the actual production of the vaccine. You can find it. It's not hard. You have the Google machine. Just Google it. Here, let's see. I'm going to Google it right now. I know why they're there, but I'm going to Google it right now. See what I find. What's at the top of the list? So I typed into Google, why is formaldehyde in vaccines? Formaldehyde has a long history of safe use in the manufacture of certain viral and bacterial vaccines. It is used to inactivate viruses so they don't cause disease. Like, for example, poliovirus used to make poliovirus used to make a polio vaccine, and to detoxify bacterial toxins, such as the toxin used to make diphtheria vaccine. So there, that was easy. And let's see, why is mercury in vaccines? The I always forget how to say this word. Thiomersal? Thiomersal? Thiomersal. That's not right. I know it's not right. Anyway, the controversy describes the claims that vaccines contain the mercury-based preservative thiomersal contribute to the development of autism and other brain development disorders. Thiomersal is no longer used in children's vaccines in the United States except some types of flu shots. So it says right here, it's a mercury-based preservative. Now, if you really wanted to get into it, you can look in how much mercury is actually poisonous and how much does this, that, and the other thing. But they took it out. It's a federal law. You're no longer allowed to use this in vaccines in the United States. Whether or not that was justified, it was a big controversy, and people were freaking out. Why, if it's perfectly fine, why did you have to make a big law saying this needed to be taken out? Well, it's because you people were freaking out for no reason. That's what it was. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna jot down my notes here. See what else I have left to talk about. I covered it all. Okay, so hopefully, this has helped you gain an understanding of how vaccines are how they're developed, how they work, what they do, the history of it, and because if you know the facts about vaccines, you can make a proper decision when it comes to life-saving vaccines that we have available to us today. And as a father of a 1-month-old, I would really appreciate it if you guys would vaccinate your kids, hopefully you're vaccinated and you're not carrying some diphtheria thing, because it is. I was listening to a podcast where this lady was presenting a baby who whooping cough, and it is heartbreaking. Baby can't breathe, and it could have been prevented. It just, educate yourselves. Hopefully this helped. Educate your family. Don't be one of those guys that just sticks his nose in and yells at people, because we need to create productive dialogue on this. Just like we need to create productive dialogue on abortion. Use the tips, I think it's in episode 3, thefetalposition.com/3. Use the tips that I laid out there for increasing the productive dialogue that we can have about abortion and the productive dialogue that we can have on vaccines. And again, to jump back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this episode, is use the same tactics to have productive dialogue on everything, on the idea that all lives matter, especially if they are the current political hot button issue. We have to make sure that we are not picking and choosing that only unborn lives matter, only cop lives matter, only black lives matter. That's nonsense. Everyone matters. So that's all I got for you guys today. So if you want to hit me up on Twitter, the fetal underscore, or just at fetal underscore position. Again, join the Facebook group. I'm sure there'll probably be a little bit of pushback on this episode. If not, that's okay too. But, even if you disagree, even if you agree, push back on something you thought I didn't do enough of a good job on. That you can find that at thefetalposition.com/Facebook. And because this is episode 10, the show notes for this page will be thefetalposition.com/10. If I've left anything out, please forgive me. And if you feel so inclined, I would love for you guys to share this episode with someone who is, along the anti-vaccine lines, because the proper way to approach a decision is to look at the facts, look at the reasons, and then come to a conclusion. Maybe they have something they want to push back on. That's fine. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to stop rambling. If you want to leave a comment or question, you know where to find me. And if you want to review this podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. You can review it on iTunes, and if you do that, I will thank you with open arms forever and ever. Amen. All right, I'll talk to you guys next time.